was in 6th grade, I had the most terrible misfortune of having to deal with a group of mean girls. Every single day of middle school was miserable because of them. The worst of the bullies is a girl that I will refer to as Suzanne, because that was her name. She is the reason why I loved my school library. I loved my librarians because they let me be a student monitor, and I was able to go in the mornings to the library, and every single lunch I was at the library. Books and the library saved me from daily bullying. Books made my life in middle school so much more bearable. But books couldn't protect me from the harsh reality of a world that told me every single day I didn't belong. You see, when you hear people say to you, why don't you go back to your own country, and this is the only country that you've ever known, you start to believe that you don't belong, that you're an outsider, a perpetual foreigner. Still, I loved books. I mean, who doesn't love Once Upon a Times and Happy Ever Afters? Although we understand Happy Ever After is a myth, right? We cannot expect perfection in life, but we can and do crave them in our stories, in our books. But when you don't see yourself in the literature that you read, you start to wonder, do I deserve happy ever afters? I didn't realize it, but I had internalized this belief that I don't deserve happy ever afters. And it wasn't until I went to college and I found a book that transformed my life. And that book was the Joy Luck Club. You see, when you're young, you don't know what you've been missing if you've never seen it before. And I didn't know that the hole in my heart that had formed from this belief that I could never be American enough was formed because of a lack of representation. I didn't know that seeing yourself in the pages of a book would be life transforming. For me, that book, Joy Luck Club, was my once upon a time, where there was a girl like me, with parents like mine, and family experiences that were so much like my own that it didn't matter that it was about Chinese Americans and I'm actually Korean American. It didn't matter. I had finally found my Asian American immigrant family experience in the pages of a book, and it was life transforming. I finally understood that this was a book that saved me from my own self-hatred, that made me realize that being Asian American was nothing to be ashamed of. Now, when I had children of my own, I made it my mission to find them the books that I didn't have when I was younger. And I was really grateful to find Linda Sue Park, Lisa Yee, Grace Lin, and yet there were so few. I couldn't even fill a shelf with the books for Asian American representation. So I decided that I would write the book that I wanted my children to find themselves in. Yeah, you're clapping. I really stunk at it though. It took me 10 years to actually get published because, you know, I'm actually a lawyer by trade. And, you know, legal writing, creative writing, they don't really translate that well. I actually had to train my brain not to write like a lawyer. In fact, my first critique readers would be like, Ellen, but how do your characters feel? What is the emotional, what are the emotions that they are feeling as they go through these terrible things that you're putting your characters through? And I said, who cares what they feel? This is what's happening, this is what's happening, that's what's happening. That's all okay, so I realized I was starting at level 0 in the creative writing arena. However, the nice thing about learning how to write is that you read a lot of books. And I read all of the children's books I could get my hands on, and I rediscovered my love of children's literature. And quite frankly, I want all of us to read children's books because I think they're so wonderful. But I want you to read it like you would when you were a kid, not with the adult judgments and biases, but with that open, simple joy of story that children have. Because when you do, you realize that everyone deserves a happy ever after. Now, I'm not saying that kids love all books. No, kids are very opinionated. But they don't do that thing. You know that thing that adults love to do? That snobby, judgy thing, right? Like read children's books? How embarrassing. Write children's books? Ugh. Why don't you do something more useful? Why don't you write a real book instead? I've actually had people say that to me. And the sad thing is that I actually love being a children's book author. It brings me so much joy, so much great joy to write for young readers, to meet young readers. And quite frankly, in the 15 years I practiced law, I don't think being a lawyer ever brought me any joy, but now I write middle grade and young adult books, and I actually present mostly at middle schools. Yes, middle schools, my nemesis, the hellscape of my youth. Why, you ask, Ellen, would you go back voluntarily to middle school? Well, the thing is, I remember it so well. Well, I mean, if you've been bullied daily, you probably can never forget it. And so I know how middle school is so rough. And if ever there was a group of people who needed some good stories, it's them. Now, I will tell you, though, it is a truly humbling experience to present in front of a crowd of middle schoolers. They are brutally honest. They will tell you if they don't like your book. They will tell you if it's boring. They will even list all the authors and authors' books they like better than yours. They're very honest. But you know what? There's no greater praise than when a young reader tells you they love your book. I have met readers across the country who tell me I'm their favorite author. Oh. I get fan mail from readers who tell me that I am the best writer they have ever read in their entire life. All right, they're only 10, but I'm going to celebrate that. That's a win for me. Now, the thing is, I write mostly Asian American characters, but my readers come from all backgrounds, all races, all cultures, and they like my characters. They can relate to my characters. They don't do that thing where they're like, oh, this book is not for me. They care if the story is good. That's what they care about. You can write about a black kid, a white kid, an Asian kid. The story can be about animals, talking, trains, fantastical creatures. They only care that the story is good, and they will root for the character with their whole entire being. So then who is it that has an issue with diversity in children's literature? Yeah. So, let me tell you a story. Several years ago, I was at the bookstore, and there was a little white girl reading a book, and she was really into it. Like, she was several pages in, dog-earing the pages, which is sacrilege. Like, there's a reason I actually read my ebooks, and my physical copies are just for display. Don't touch. But anyway, I digress. She was really into this story. She was absorbed by it. And her mother came over, and she took one look at the cover, snatched it out of her daughter's hands, and she said, "No, honey, this book is not for you." Now, the daughter was confused. She'd been really enjoying this story. She did not understand why her mother took this book away. But I knew. I did, and it broke my heart. Because this book, The Mighty Miss Malone by Christopher Paul Curtis, had a beautiful little black girl on the cover. And it breaks my heart to think about the message that that mom taught her child that day. And you see, this is why diversity in children's literature is so important. Because I will tell you, books are sometimes the first places that children meet people different from them. And books also are the safe spaces they need for stories that are about people who are similar to them also. Like the wonderful educator Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop explains, books provide those all-important mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors that allow all children to see themselves in their world. How important is that? So I was part of the We Need Diverse Books grassroots movement. In 2014, we formed. And you see, we are all about addressing the need for diversity in children's literature. When we formed, of all the books published in children's literature that year, only 8% were written by authors that were BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Only 8%. WNDB formed as a nonprofit afterward, and we provide grants, we provide scholarships, mentorships, and all types of programming, including free books to give to schools in need across the country. And in the nearly 10 years since our formation, the number of books by BIPOC authors has increased to over 40%. And that five-fold increase can definitely be attributed to the advocacy and programming WNDB does. But instead of being able to celebrate this great progress, I need to talk to you about something else. I need to talk to you about the backlash that is happening across the country. In this past school year, there were over 3,300 instances of book bans and challenges in US public schools. Over 3,300 in the past school year. Now, these book bans and challenges have overwhelmingly targeted books by and about Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ plus content. There is an agenda. When we police who and what our children can read, we are telling them, we are teaching them that not everybody deserves to have their stories told. Not only is that devastating, but it is dangerous because it allows prejudice, racism, and hatred to grow unchecked. As a founding member of We Need Diverse Books, it has been my mission to go all over the country to schools to talk to the students about diversity, to tell them that they are seen, to tell them that their stories matter. But I will never forget several years ago when I met a young teen, a young LGBTQ teen who came to me after my presentation to tell me about their story. They were in 8th grade. They wore long sleeves on a very warm day to cover the scars from cutting that was all over their arms. And yet, there was so much pride in their face. There was so much pride when they told me that the movement for diverse books had helped them find the courage to come out to their family. That the books that they found their story in gave them the comfort that they needed to know that they deserved happy ever afters. And for that teen, finding their story in a book was not just life-changing, it was life-saving. Because it was that story, that book, that showed them that they too were not alone, that there was people like them out there, and that they could deserve happiness. They were not the only kid that came to talk to me over the years. I've spoken to many students who come and tell me that they have found safe haven in their school libraries, that they have finally found themselves in the pages of a book. These are students who have been proud to be part of a movement championing children's literature. But now, safe havens are threatened all over the US because of book bans and challenges by those who want to dictate who among us deserves happy ever afters. And that is a scary place to be. For me personally, I have seen my school visits cut drastically back, as schools are now afraid to have me come and speak to their students. Teachers, librarians, they contact me and they let me know that they're being targeted, that they're being harassed, that they're even being fired just for championing children's diversity in literature. I worry about the students who used to come and look for me after my school presentations. I worry about the students who used to find safe haven in their schools and now no longer feel safe. I worry for all of them, and my heart hurts. So, when you hear about book bans and challenges, ask yourself this very important question: who deserves happy ever afters? And if your answer is everyone, then join us to fight against censorship. Join us to fight against book bans and challenges, and let us have a world where all children can find themselves in the pages of a book. Thank you.